Today we're talking about 5 reasons why we as homeowners tend to overestimate the value of our properties.
Hey guys, welcome back to this week's episode or show or whatever you want to call it.
Another video.
We have been doing listing appointments for the last 5 years in a row, and there is a common trend, a common theme throughout these listing appointments, and we wanted to address those today. Rarely, whenever we get to the pricing point of the listing appointment, do we come in under or over what the seller's expectations are. Sometimes we do, but
nice
most of the time, a seller's expectations or our value of our own personal property is typically higher than what market value is. And so we wanted to talk about those 5 things today. So number 1, typically you look at Zillow Zestimate. That is typically not going to be 100% accurate, whether it's HAR, whatever kind of general broad estimate, they're going to be pulling comps in that an appraiser would never use to find market value for your property. So if your property is a 2-story, they might be using other properties, whether it's 2 stories in your neighborhood, that have larger lots, smaller lots, properties that have power lines behind them, properties that have pools. All of these things are upward and downward concessions that we have to make concession for because the market does that as well when they're making offers on your property.
And the other part of that is people go off the tax appraisal value, and they think that an actual appraiser has come out and valued their home when really the tax appraisal is very different from what the actual market value is for the home. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but either way it's completely separate from what the market value, which is what a buyer is willing to pay for the property. Number 2 is that sellers have a personal connection with their property. So they have great memories. They may have raised their family in this home, and so they're personally attached to it and valuing it more. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's valued more price-wise, although it may be valued more in our hearts and in our minds.
Yeah, there's a numerical number, and there's algorithms, and there's everything that go into pricing a property versus, hey, this was mine, I owned it. And we're reading a book right now that talks about, because if someone owns something, they generally give a 15 to 20% markup value because they owned it. And so, but when it comes to running the comps and seeing what comparable other properties, it has to go along with the numbers. Number 3. So a lot of times we will come through and we'll show the comps. So a regular listing appointment, we walk around the property, we see the property as compared to everything else that we've seen on the market. Then we talk about marketing and our strategy for that, and then the price of the property. 2 things sell properties, that's marketing, exposure, and price, right? So when we get to that, we show them the comps that we have been able to compare their property to. And we highlight the ones that are most comparable to their property. And then we look at the price per square foot on that, because that's what appraisers typically will use in most of our communities here in West Houston. So when we get to that, there's always that one comp. Well, our neighbors are listing theirs. Our neighbors are listing theirs for $140 a square foot. And I just recommended we list for $121 a square foot.
Okay.
The reason is because your neighbor's property, we're a 2-story, they're a 1-story. We don't have a pool, they do have a pool. 1-stories and 2-stories can never be comparable to one another. And there's very, very few instances where it could be. 1.5 stories taken into account. But at the same time, there are properties that are absolutely, even in your same community, not a comp for your property, even though it's right down the street. So we can't use those because an appraiser's not going to use a pool with no pool, a 2-story to a 1-story, and so forth.
And one of the things that we get asked a lot is, how do you know the price of my home if you've never seen it? And so typically, if we already know what the upgrades are because you've told us, then we'll have that in mind. But if we don't know what the upgrades are, we have a range. We'll say, this is the low end, this is the high end, and we won't decide on the actual price until we get there and see what the upgrades are, because they do affect the value, but sometimes not as much as we think that they do.
Number 4, A lot of times because there are 46,000 agents in the Houston area, it is a very competitive market, and sometimes we're not the only agents that that client is interviewing or that seller is interviewing to list their home. Well, so a lot of times when we go in, they say, well, so-and-so, this agent with this broker said, I could get, $30,000 more than what you have said. I always encourage, well, let's look up that agent. Let's see, where their primary market is. Let's see, and a lot of times they fall within the 84% of the agents in Houston that only do about 4 to 6 deals a year. That means they are part-time. So the experience there, and we just came from an appointment where that exact same thing happened. We said, well, was that property, did it have a pool? Because it sounds like that property was completely remodeled and had a pool. We looked it up, sure enough, the one they were comparing the subject property to had a pool, it was completely remodeled, and it did deserve a $30,000 up, but that wasn't the subject property we were talking about. So a lot of times experience, well, all the time, experience wins whenever it comes to pricing properties, and not just being on a conservative side. We're aggressive. We've broken multiple community records, and we're also the agents that a lot of people call whenever their home isn't sold the first or second time, and we're able to sell it that second or third time.
And the fifth reason that sellers tend to overprice their home is they want to throw a Hail Mary and say, why don't we just try it? Let's just list it for $100,000 over what the comps are saying and just see what happens, and we can adjust it. So what happens typically is that they're not going to get enough showings, they're not going to get any offers. They think that they may get a low offer, but no one even sees the property or puts in an offer typically. And so it sits on the market. We have to do multiple price reductions. Instead of pricing it right the first time, we do find that when we do that, less price reductions means you get an overall higher price than having to reduce multiple times. And the carrying cost of covering that property for that many months, waiting for that right offer, just, it's not the win-win scenario for everybody.
And we've seen that happen before multiple times, and we were able to come in and save the day 6 months later, but at the same time, when it didn't sell for that price. But when you're talking about listing that much over, unless it's an $8 million property, I have a very hard time pricing $100,000 over. But also the market that we're in does justify pricing aggressively, but aggressive should be defined. It should be aggressive within the comp margins, right? So we have a low, we have a high. We can go a little bit above that high in a market like right now because we don't have the inventory, and so buyers are paying. We just got another one, Rio, shout out to Rio, another one with 2 offers, $10,000 and $12,000 over the asking price. If you price it right, you're going to get more or asking price in a timely manner. If you price it way too high, you're not going to get offers, and if you do, they're going to be considered lowball offers, even though they might be the right price offer.
Right. And we find the leverage that the seller has in those first few weeks on the market. So again, that's why we want to price right for the first time to get you the most amount of money and to sell as quick as possible from the beginning. So if you have any questions about your home and the value of your home, we'd be happy to sit down with you and talk to you about the actual comps. And some people ask about upgrades. What is actually going to add value to my home? That's a very common question. And don't wait until, don't do $1,000 or $100,000 in upgrades and then ask us over. Why don't you ask us over now? We'll talk through the strategy of how to get the most money for your property.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you guys and have a great week.